Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Science with Mr. Emond. Today we're going to be looking at the evidence for evolution. In particular today we're going to be focusing in on comparative anatomy. So this is an interesting topic. What we're doing with comparative anatomy is obviously we're comparing the anatomy or physiology or morphology of different groups of animals or plants. And what we're looking for is certain structural features that are similar in those different groups. And if we find similar structures, it may imply common ancestry. And common ancestry means that they may have had a evolutionary ancestor that is in common. Okay? So one term that I really want you guys to know is homologous structures. Homologous structures are usually held as really good evidence for two species coming from common lines of evolution. And a homologous structure is a structure or an anatomical feature that's similar in their basic structure, but they're being used in different ways. So homologous structures are things like similar bone structures, yet those bone structures are being used in different ways of the species. We would call that a homologous structure. Let's look at an example of this. So let's look at the bone structure of a dolphin, which is a mammal that lives in the ocean, and a human, which is a mammal that lives on land. Both of them are mammals. Just the fact that we belong to the same group means that most likely we share an evolutionary history. And we can see that very clearly when we look at the bones. So the bones in this case would be the basic structure, the bone structure. And if you look at them, we both have a humerus, we both have radiuses, we both have an ulna, we both have carpals, and we both have phalanges. And if you count the number of phalanges, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on humans, of course, we have 5 digits as well. And so that you can see, hopefully, that the bone structure between a dolphin and a human, they're pretty similar, despite the fact that what are the bones in the dolphins used for? For swimming. They're the fins. And what are hands of humans used for? Grabbing onto things, right? Our arms are much longer and our digits are much stronger, and therefore grabbing things. This is how we've evolved and adapted, using our hands to manipulate our environment. Dolphins, on the other hand, their bones came from a similar place. We have a common ancestor, but how they interact with their environment is very different from humans. They were adapted to swim, right? And so at one point in evolutionary history, they came from a terrestrial mammal, like most mammals. Mammals evolved on land, or originated on land. But the mammals that led to the line of dolphins, that tail is very similar to the tail of whales. Whales and dolphins occupy similar environments and adapted to life in those environments and stemmed from mammals, terrestrial mammals. And so we are going to use this as an example in a future class. I don't want to give it away too much, but try to think of what dolphins and whales are like. They're carnivores, right? They're top predators. Whales are like the top of the food chain in the ocean, right? And dolphins are really high up there too. They're master carnivores. They probably came from a master carnivore on land go back hundreds and hundreds of millions of years. And they came from some ancestor that was probably a fantastic carnivore too. Just the top of top predators. But this top predator, because it was competing with other top predators, looked for an area in the environment where they could be successful and there wasn't very much competition. And where that was terrestrial carnivores that would eat things in the ocean. And so think of a top predator that this isn't a swimmer, this is still just a terrestrial carnivore, but it would go into the shallow regions of the ocean where it's still walking and look for fish or other objects that would be too close on the beach line, right? And it would go and snack its prey. And over hundreds of million years, it got better at doing that. Eventually, you come up with this species that's really good at dog paddling. And I kind of gave it away there where it might have come from, but really good at dog paddling and maybe started getting webbing between the feet. And this isn't like one day you wake up and poof, there's webs. No, this is like over millions and millions of years, but then became really, really good at swimming. Probably became really good at diving underwater and using those limbs and the webbed feet and to dive and swim and catch their prey. And probably got even better at holding their breath underwater so they could chase underwater for longer periods of time. And over the course of hundreds of millions of years, though that ancestor may have split up into a whole bunch of different species that are adapted to eating different kinds of prey, because there's a lot of stuff in the ocean that they can eat, right? And some of the groups would be specialized at eating different kinds of things. And eventually, what do you have? A whole bunch of different kinds of dolphins and whales, all beautifully adapted to eating and being master carnivores in their environments. And this, like when we see homologous structures like this, these homologous structures are used to illustrate something called adaptive radiation. And that's where several new species can rapidly diversify from the ancestral source, kind of like in the example I just gave you. With each of those new species adapted to utilize a specific unoccupied niche. And niche is a word that we've been using in science since 10th grade when we learned about ecosystems. Something's niche is its job or role in an ecosystem. So the example we were using, their job or role was that of a top carnivore in their ecosystem. They are tertiary or quaternary consumers, top of the food chain. That's their niche. And you can have top predators that have different niches based off what they're eating, right? Not every top predator eats the same thing. If they were to eat the same thing, oh my God, competition would be intense and their populations would be super low. And in fact, one group would probably win out over the other one, and that unfortunate one would go extinct, right? Or they would have to adapt and change their diet, and over millions of years might get better at eating that new thing that there's less competition for eating. Adaptive radiation is a fantastic example of divergent evolution. And divergent, think of the word diverge. If we were on the same path and you took a right turn and I took a left turn, we would have diverged, followed new paths. And our textbook definition for this is where natural selection acts on the genetic variation among individuals in a population. And we have not really talked about natural selection yet. That's coming up very shortly. But we have talked about genetic variation. Just look in the classroom that you're in and the humans in that classroom, and we are all very different than one another. We have different features based off our genes. And when natural selection acts on those differences and leads to differential survival rates, those that are better adapted to surviving in their environment, especially in nature, where nature is just, it's brutal living out there in the world, right? If you don't have a home to protect you and money and technology and tools. If you're out in the wild, nature is brutal and survival is not easy. And those who survive pass on their genes, and those best adapted at surviving pass on any advantageous traits that they may have been born with, right? And over time, this can lead to new species. Okay, one last thing on this page is the more similar these basic structures are, the more closely related they're likely to be. So if I looked at a dolphin and bone and a human bone, I would look at that and go, they're actually pretty similar, right? But if I look at like the bones of a monkey or a chimpanzee, let's go to this slide here. If I look at the bones of a monkey, look at this. Which one's more similar? The bones of a monkey or the bones of the dolphin? Well, of course, they both have similarities, right? We can see the humerus, the ulna, the radius, the metacarpals, the carpals, and we can see that in dolphins too. But one is more similar to the other, right? Humans and chimpanzees have far more similarity than dolphins and humans. They're similar, but one's more similar. The more similar those homologous structures are, the more closely related they're likely to be. And I'm hoping that that kind of seems self-evident to you. So let's try out this activity on the top here. Let's switch on over and try this out. So we're just going to click on the limb that's not like the others. Well, I can see the pentadactyl limb in these two. This one's the most dissimilar. That should be easy. Again, this one is not similar at all. Click on that. And this one is not similar at all. This still has the bone structure. It's still very different, right? But I can still see a humerus, ulna, radius, right? Here I can see the humerus, ulna, radius, etc. Like these four have it, this one doesn't. And so these are homologous structures. Same basic structure. They have what's called the pentadactyl limb, but they're used in different ways, right? This species is flying, this one's grabbing things, this one's walking on their ulna and radius, right? And this one's swimming. So very different uses in the environment. And this is where we're going to get into talking a little bit more about the pentadactyl limb. So the pentadactyl limb here, it's your classical example of homologous structures. Why is it the classical example? Because it's what we have. We like looking at what we have and learning about our evolutionary history. Where did we come from? That's a question we've been asking for probably 70 to 100,000 years, right? The first Homo sapiens, the first sentient Homo sapiens, probably were wondering where we came from. And that's why all the different belief systems in the world try to tackle that question, right? So mammals, birds, amphibians, and reptiles, we all share similar arrangements of our bones. And that's in the appendage based off 5-digit limbs. And if we look at all these different examples, we can see, wow, they're so similar. I mean, obviously very different, but they have that similar pentadactyl limb design, right? And why? It's probably because we came from a common ancestor, and then the differences between them is us adapting to different niches in our environment. And our bones obviously change over the course of millions and billions of years. I mean, we can see that if we compare Homo sapiens from 100,000 years ago to Homo sapiens now. There's changes that we're going through right now, right? Our feet are changing, our eyes are coming forward, we're losing our molars, our pinkies and pinky toes are getting smaller. We can see the process being undergone within ourselves and within this current timeline, right? And obviously, your kids are all of a sudden not going to have molars, but the problems with molars are going to be increasing over time, and we're going to have to be removing them. Many of you might have had your molars taken out because they cause issues with your jaws. Because our jaws are getting smaller. And why are our jaws getting smaller? We've drastically changed our diet since the dawn of our species. And our mouth is adapting to the new kind of foods we eat. And those molars are no longer all that useful. And so as our jaws are getting smaller, we have less space for them, and they're causing big issues, right? And so there's an example of evolution within humans. And so let's look at the differences in the pentadactyl limb. Well, human hands were adapted for tool manipulation, grabbing and using branches and stones in our early history. And now we use computers, right? And golf clubs, and I'm talking about the things I like manipulating when it comes to tools. And that has to do with, we want power and precision grips, right? Birds and bats, on the other hand, they might have come from a common ancestor, but they're adapted for flying, not for manipulating tools. And so if I look at a bird and a bat wing, there's going to be more similarities between a bird and a bat than there is between humans and any of these two. because they're adapting to similar niches in their environment. Horse hooves are adapted for galloping, right? And we can see how the structure here would allow them to do that very well, right? And it's going to be a similar structure to that of a pig. Whales and dolphins are adapted for swimming. And again, we already saw the dolphin limb. Let's move on. Let's look at analogous structures. So this is a cautionary tale where sometimes you might have features or structures that look the same, but they did not come from a common ancestor. The reason why they look the same is because that species is adapting to similar environments. Like if you look here, look at these are killer whales, right? If we look at the whales, they have fins that allow them to swim effectively, and they have this streamlined body, right? They're very well adapted swimmers. And if we look at sharks, they're also very well adapted swimmers, right? And many of the patterns are similar in how they've adapted to swimming in their environment. Whales don't have anal fins, right? But, you know, they do have dorsal fins and pectoral fins. There's definitely similarities between the two, right? But just think about that for a second. Wait, killer whales, are they fish? No, they're mammals. They're mammals. Sharks, mammals? No. So we know just from our common knowledge that these two things are very dissimilar. One's a mammal, one's a fish. Do fish and mammals have a common ancestor? No, I mean, yes, if you go really far back in time, of course, everything has a common ancestor because we all came from the same original cell. We learned about that already, right? So if you go really far back in time, of course they have a common ancestor. But did that common ancestor between the two also have fins? No. No, it did not, right? Whales came from terrestrial mammals. We've talked about that. Sharks came from a previous aquatic species, right? If you look at the fins of a shark, they don't have a pentadactyl limb inside of them. They don't have that. And so despite both having fins, they didn't come from common ancestry. They came from adapting to similar niches. So structures or anatomical features that are similar in function, like the fins of whales and sharks, they're similar in function, they're both used to swim. Well, if they're similar in function, but they have different basic structures, this has a pentadactyl limb, this doesn't, different basic structures, those are called analogous structures. And be careful, because analogous structures do not imply common ancestry. They don't both have fins because they share a common ancestor that had fins. They both have fins because they're evolving similarities when they're adapting to similar environments. That's why they both have fins. And this is an example of convergent evolution. So convergent evolution is not really a type of evolution. It's the opposite of divergent. Divergent is you have a common ancestor and you split up. And these two branches are going to be occupying different niches and may actually adapt to their environments in different ways and end up looking very dissimilar. Converging, when you converge, you start off from very different branches of life. But because you're adapting to similar environments, you end up with features that allow you to become adapted well to that environment. And they're likely going to be the same feature, like fins for swimming. And you might end up looking the same. Like if you look at whales and sharks, they obviously look similar, but they didn't come from the same place. So that's convergent evolution. And they have analogous structures. They do not have a common ancestor. Another example of this is that of the Thylacosmilus and the Smilodon. Now the Stylocosmolus and the Smilodon are both extinct, and they both have saber teeth. So that might, if you just looked at these skulls here, you would say, wow, they look really similar. They must have had a common ancestor. No, they didn't. The Thylacosmolus is a marsupial, and the Smilodon is a placental mammal. So yes, they're both mammals, but they're very different kinds of mammals. And yes, they have a common ancestor, and that common ancestor had canine teeth, just like we have canines, right? All mammals have canine teeth. That's a homologous structure. So the presence of canine teeth, yeah, that's homologous. But do all mammals have saber teeth? No. That didn't come from a common ancestor. If it did, then all mammals would have it, right? All mammals would have saber teeth, and that's not true. If you look at this branch, the origin of saber teeth happened after marsupials split from placentals. So we can see the marsupial line and the placental line they diverged. They went in very different directions, adapting in their environments in different ways. Marsupials, their reproductive strategy is that of, well, you know, they have the pouch that you give a live birth, and then they live in the pouch, right? They're really cute. The other line is the placental line. So it's, rather than the pouch being an external pouch that you grow up in, the pouch is actually inside your body. It's the placenta, right? And so placental mammals give birth to really large things, and marsupial mammals give birth to really small things that end up climbing into that pouch outside the body and live in that pouch and grow up in that pouch. So very different reproductive strategies, leading to very different mammals. Now this would have split. Now we have placental mammals, and there's a line of placental mammals that don't have saber teeth, and there's a line of placental mammals that do, like the Smilodon. On this side, we have the marsupial line, and there's a large line of them that don't have saber teeth, and there's a few of them that do, right? And so the origin of saber teeth and the origin of saber teeth in placental mammals and that of the ones in marsupial mammals, they evolved in very different branches. And that's because saber teeth are really good for specific things, right? For being top predators. And so our marsupial top predator evolved these really elongated canines, saber teeth. And on the other branch of life, you would have had placental mammals that evolved the very same elongated, really dramatized canine teeth that led to saber teeth on their line. They evolved in similar ways by adapting to similar niches in the environment, but they did not come from a common ancestor. So they are not an example of homologous structures. They are analogous structures. If you're still confused about the differences between homologous and analogous structures, go ahead and click this link up here. You will find this video hopefully to be helpful in helping you understand the difference between homologous and analogous structures. When you're done, come on back, we'll continue the lesson. Welcome back, let's move on. The next thing I want to talk about is vestigial structures. Now, we've talked about vestigial structures in Health Science 20. A vestigial structure is something that's a remnant of your ancestors. So some species show the presence of functionless and reduced remnants of structures or organs that were once present in their ancestors. And we've talked about some of these things, like for example, your appendix is an example of a vestigial structure, right? We don't actually need them anymore, right? In fact, today they cause more harm than they do good in a lot of cases, right? And that's because our diet changed and it's no longer useful to us because we don't need the bacteria that lived in our appendix. We don't need them anymore, right? We don't eat that stuff that they were useful for. And so changes to the environment have rendered those structures or organs redundant. And so over time, they've lost their functionality. They often get reduced in size over time until eventually you might not even see them anymore. Like another example of a vestigial structure is our tailbones. So if you look, I mean, you know we have tailbones. We've heard that word before. But our tailbones are so small. They're so incredibly tiny. And it's because we don't need a tail anymore. We have tail bones, but we've long time ago lost the use of a tail because a tail is good for helping you balance when you're up in trees and stuff. And we haven't lived in trees for hundreds of millions of years. They are so not useful anymore. And so those bones have been reduced in size over hundreds of millions of years until now they're only a couple centimeters long. And each of those bones is millimeters long. They're so drastically reduced, and you can look at images of that on Google and learn more about it. These structures, these vestigial organs and structures, they demonstrate divergence of a species from a past activity. You develop vestigial organs because you no longer are interacting in your environment in the same way, and that structure has become redundant and useless and eventually gets smaller and disappears. So an example, the visual I have up here, is that of pelvic bones in whales. So we know that whales came from terrestrial mammals that of course had a use for a pelvis, right? It supports a more upright posture and like on your forelimbs, right? And this presence of this bone suggests that whale ancestors were terrestrial, and we know now that they were. We can see the pelvic bone here is actually completely detached now from the spine, and it's decreased significantly in size until eventually, like if we were around to see whales 200 million years from now, I bet you that those pelvic bones would be like our tails, just minuscule millimeters, centimeters in size rather than the inches that they are now. Here's another example. So this is a video from SciShow. Go ahead and click this link and they will show you a couple more examples of vestigial structures. And when you're done, come on back. Welcome back. There's just one more thing I'd like you to look at today, and that's this video by Crash Course on Comparative Anatomy. Again, you can click that link right up there. And this is going to be looking at what makes us animals. So what structures or features make us animals as opposed to the other domains and kingdoms of life. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Thanks for watching, everybody. You can like, follow, and subscribe to my social medias to get notifications as soon as new content is uploaded. In the top corner here, you will find the playlist that this video is in. Watch the unit from beginning to end, and over here, you will find the next video in this unit. Keep learning, everybody. Take care.